Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to this week's edition of Addiction Prevention Coalition webinar. My name is Art Wimberly. I am a person in long-term recovery. I'm also a certified recovery coach here in the Central Alabama area, as well as do Enneagram counseling in addiction as well. So good to be back with you. Today we have Raven Johnson with us. We're doing a sharing of a story today like we do occasionally. We wanted to do it especially here in September, which is, of course, Recovery Month. And I'll introduce Raven to you in detail in just a minute or two. But I wanted to welcome everybody back online, and also wanted to give folks that are tuning in a chance to catch up to us. We'll also have, as usual, the function today that if you have a question, you can put that in the Q&A or in the chat, and we'll do our best to kind of monitor that as we go and try to answer that, any questions you have or any comments on that as we go along. We'll try to make sure we get through those before we get out of the next 45 minutes to an hour. So we'll give you a second or two for people to catch up with us. And we thank you. Remember, as always, Addiction Prevention Coalition can be reached online 24 hours a day at apcbham.org. There you'll find all types of resources, education, communication, links, a number of different things. If you yourself are struggling with substance use disorder, or if you have a loved one or someone that you're wanting to support, we have information there for you always. And we also have a number you can contact to try to reach out for help as well. So just want to make you aware of those. And as I said a minute ago, September is Recovery Month. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And one of the things we do at APC is we like to share stories of hope, strength, experience, and hope of those who have been in recovery for a while and are celebrating that fact and want to share their experience with other folks. So as I said earlier, today we've got Raven Johnson with us. Hey, Raven.
Hey, I'm Raven.
Raven is actually been with APC about a year now. And Raven, first tell us a little bit about where you're from, what's your background, where'd you grow up?
Yeah, I'm from a town called Gadsden, Alabama. It's about an hour north of here. And I moved to Birmingham to go to college at UAB. And I studied public health and psychology. And I got to APC by AmeriCorps, actually. I've been here, like he said, for about a year as an AmeriCorps Vista, working as a student specialist.
Great. Tell them a little bit about what a student specialist does in this community.
Yeah, so I work in student programs. So I work in elementary schools teaching a course called Positive Action, where we teach like social and emotional learning. I also work in high schools. We have in-focus chapters, which are peer-led, adult-guided chapters where we talk about substance use, but also like catalyst issues that can lead to addiction, whether that be mental illness. We talk about human trafficking, anything really that might be like stigmatized, that would facilitate good discussion.
Great, yeah. So part of the mission of APC and part of what you're involved with for this last year is kind of this ground floor of trying to reach students at the earliest age possible, not necessarily assuming they already are struggling with substance use disorder, but actually kind of going a little deeper and broader, as you said, about catalyst issues that all of us face at one time or another that might make it a little complicated for them to say no later. Is that part of it?
Yeah, absolutely. So we try to teach resilience, which is like the ability to bounce back from difficult situations and really strengthening protective factors and trying to prevent trauma. But, you know, if there is trauma, there is a way to overcome that, because a lot of times that is something that leads to substance use or like speeds up the process that somebody might start using substances.
Yeah. The statistics are pretty stark for that in terms of young folks that have gone through trauma, or ACEs as they're often talked about that it really exponentially increases the potential that they will eventually turn to a substance or a behavior to deal with that.
Absolutely. So I'm pretty sure trauma is like the #1 mental health symptom that's reported on day one of treatment admissions. That was me. I was one of those statistics. And 90% of people with substance use disorder started using before the age of 18. So I really, when I'm working in student programs, we're really trying to delay the onset of first use as long as we possibly can.
Yeah, great. Because the other factor we're beginning to see more and more, and I know you know this all too well, is that for those of us that begin using before 18 or considerably before 18, especially and consistently, it's much tougher to deal with it, much tougher to stop. And all the consequences seem to actually multiply if you start that early. Is that right?
Yes, and that was also true for me. So I started using when I was 16. That was the first time I ever drank alcohol, and I started seeing consequences kind of early. I started drinking like a little bit after my parents got a divorce. And I don't want to say that's the reason why I was drinking, but it just kind of made it easier for me to get to that point. And, you know, at first I didn't really see a consequence, but I ended up moving to boarding school in Mobile. And I, couldn't really stop thinking about wanting to drink again. And eventually the opportunity came and I did. And, like I made good grades and, I was involved in all these extracurricular activities. So I kind of allowed that to like be my justification of why I could do this. But, very quickly, I actually ended up getting asked to leave that boarding school because I was caught drinking on campus. It started out just on the weekends when I wasn't there. And then I ended up drinking on like a Monday night in my dorm room with another girl. So that was the first time I like saw any consequences. But that didn't stop me.
Yeah, that's so common. You said earlier, at first, the drinking didn't have much consequence at all. And so it allowed you to kind of continue that at a certain level. And then when more opportunity came, that increased. And I'm sure patterns began to change. I know in my use that there were things that developed later that I would have said in the beginning I would have never even thought about doing. So did that occur for you too?
Yeah. So, I mean, like when I went back home to Gadsden for high school, it was like I was about to graduate. This happened in like February when I left. And, I was like, I'm not going to drink again, or I'm going to at least wait until college. And lo and behold, come May, I was drinking again on it was, senior skip day. And I went back to Gadsden City and I got 2 jobs. I was leaving school like halfway through the day because I was kind of ahead and never called into work. And my friends were like, hey, it's senior skip day. We're going out for lunch and you should come. And I was like, okay, I've never called into work, so I'm going to do it. And, like I started drinking that day at like lunchtime, I was drinking throughout the night. I got blackout. I got in the car with a guy and we got pulled over and he got a DUI and I got a minor in possession of alcohol and went to jail that night. And, I never thought in a million years like that would be me. I ended up losing my job because of it. I went to school the next morning. Everyone had my mugshot on their phones and were talking about it. So that was like a pretty traumatic situation. So you would think like if I was going to stop, like then would have been the time. But and I told myself then, like I promised my parents, like I'm not going to drink again until I'm 21. Maybe then I will. And, I was drinking again that summer before I went to college. And, I went to college. I graduated high school and I went to UAB and, thought it would be different. But then I kind of like started drinking alone in my dorm a lot. And I was really depressed, and it was kind of like the only thing like I looked forward to. Um, so I ended up going and seeing a therapist and a doctor, and that's when I got diagnosed with depression. And they prescribed me some medications and, told me to like limit my drinking, but I was already lying about how much I was drinking. So the medication and the therapy wasn't working as well as it could because I wasn't being honest. And then around that time is when I started using drugs other than just alcohol. I started using hallucinogens, cocaine, and then I discovered Xanax and benzodiazepines. And that was something that I knew was dangerous, and that I liked it a lot. And I just kind of like started using it occasionally, and then just like my drinking, I was using it every day. And using benzos with alcohol is extremely dangerous. Alcohol and benzodiazepines, if you don't know what those are like anti-anxiety medications. Sometimes they're referred to as sedatives. They kind of have a similar effect, but those are the two substances that like detoxing from on your own like is deadly.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, it seems in the last, I don't know, decade, maybe different time frame, but it seems like the combo of alcohol and benzodiazepines has really ramped up for some reason. Did you encounter that out in some of your community groups at all?
Um, yes and no. So like so are you asking like, is that something that was like addressed or like I became aware of out? Yeah. So I didn't really know until I started experiencing like withdrawals. Um, and I thought it was because I was anxious. I was like, I'm just shaking today because I have anxiety and depression. But I was in denial, and I was actually shaking because I was physically dependent on these substances. And there were phases where I would black out and do something really mean, or say something terrible, or just embarrass myself, and I would like quit for a while and go through withdrawals, and I would just increase my drinking to just like overcome those.
Yeah.
And eventually, before I got help, I actually got prescribed Xanax. And
So now you had legal access to it, right?
yes.
Then would you say that at that point you were still generally being dishonest to the prescribers, to your doctors about your alcohol use?
Yes, absolutely. Um, and like in a way, like I knew that I had like a problem, but also I was just like, I'm in college, I'm young, like I'll quit when I want to quit. And like after I graduated, like people started, going on with their dreams and their lives. And here I am, like out partying or drinking alone and hiding how much I'm consuming. And like my dreams kind of just like dissolved, and people say like my like drinking got in the way of my dreams, or my dreams got in the way of my drinking. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what I experienced too. And I really didn't get honest about it until like I went to treatment for the first time.
Okay. Yeah. Every addiction counselor I've ever talked to, generally almost every one of them will say, I will be glad to deal with anybody except a functional alcoholic. There's
Yeah.
something about folks that are using alcohol to an addictive degree and that can stay functional at a pretty deep level. You managed different jobs, school, all types of different relationships, even though you were using excessively, but yet we're still functioning at a relatively deep level.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I was in school full time. I used like honors college and my GPA as a way to justify it. I didn't really have to get financial help from my parents. I was working two jobs, and sometimes I was volunteering on top of that. So like, like even if my parents were like, hey, I noticed you've been struggling, like, I'd be like, you know what, like, I'm independent. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad it's not like that now.
Yeah. That's a great point though, because not only were you working and going to school, but you were kind of excelling at some of these things at times, and then still managing that secret life. So what was there a crash kind of a moment, or was it just a series of things that got you to treatment where you decided, maybe I better tell a little bit more of the truth now? Was there a moment?
Yeah, so it was kind of like a series of weeks. So after I got prescribed that Xanax prescription, I was actually living with my dad at the time, and he had kind of like mentioned like, hey, like I like you better when you're not on Xanax, basically in the nicest way. And I was like, yeah, I agree. So I would like try to stop on my own. I would go through really bad withdrawals and try to hide it. And like the more and more I tried to stop on my own, like the more guilty I felt because I kept failing. And, I stopped showing up for work, my job waiting tables, and I became suicidal. Like all of my friends didn't really want anything to do with me anymore. I remember like I went to go check out my cousin from school for her birthday one day, and I was just shaking so bad trying to fill out the form to sign her out that I just kept dropping everything. And like I wanted to make the day about her because it was her birthday, but like I immediately went and got something to drink and like drank until the shaking stopped. So just like a series of things that like I knew like this is not me. Like why am I like this? Why do I keep failing at this? And just ultimately not having a desire to live anymore. Um, I went on a 4-day bender, is what I call it, with a girl and a few other friends, and I had 3 encounters with the cops in like 4 days. And I don't know how I didn't end up in jail or, like dead, or just the things that I was getting into really leads me to believe that like there's a reason that things happen the way they did. I went and tried to check myself into UAB, the emergency room. I was very rude. They tried to call security on me. And I left, and somebody took me to Bradford the next morning. And in my head, I was just like, like I need to just rest. I need to get my anxiety and depression
Yeah.
and trauma treated, and then I can come out and I can drink like a normal person can drink. I'll have control over my drinking after I fix all that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that was denial.
Yeah, that's what I went through. I have so many people I know that have struggled and that have found recovery will say there was this point where I decided I had to get help or somebody made me get help. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, sure, I'll rest for 28 days or whatever they'll allow me, and then I'll figure something out and I'll kind of be back in control of my life. Is that what it kind of felt like to you?
Yeah, no, exactly. And I literally just thought we were going to talk about like my mental illness and nothing to do with my drinking because that wasn't the problem.
Yeah.
Um, and I soon like, I got honest about my using because they told me like that's the only way this is going to work. This is the only way you're going to get any relief from this. So I did that, and when I met with my counselor, like I was truly broken. Like I wouldn't look at her in the eyes. I was so embarrassed from the things that happened, like the 4 days leading up to me being there, and I didn't have any hope. And very quickly, I think it was like having people in recovery coming and sharing their stories is when I kind of like saw like, okay, like they're doing something that's working. Maybe I can do that too. And, I decided I was going to give this like recovery thing and stay completely sober a shot. Um, so I ended up leaving there and going to a sober living in Nashville. I stayed there long enough to finish IOP because at this point I'm still like, my self-will be something that will really help me stay sober.
For those out there that may not know, tell them what IOP is.
Okay, yeah. So IOP is intensive outpatient treatment.
Yeah.
And when you a lot of times when you go to inpatient, they refer you to do outpatient once you leave. So I was in inpatient for 26 days, and they detoxed me, gave me medications to help ease the withdrawals. And then like I met with a counselor. I had group sessions with other women. And then once I left, instead of just like releasing you out to the real world where life happens, they asked of you to go to IOP. And I was able to do that in Nashville with my sober living. And I met, I think, like 3 hours every morning during the week, and did similar counseling group sessions that I did while I was in treatment.
Okay, so you, when you transitioned out of your formal treatment at UAB, then you agreed, they suggested, or then you may have agreed to, okay, I need to do something more to transition. So that was to sober living in Nashville. And then part of sober living, one other layer was to do the intense outpatient program that they had suggested in tandem with your sober living. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. So, and I was living with women that were doing similar things. And you know, it was really, I feel like that was so beneficial for my recovery, because my identity was wrapped up in like being a partier or being like sad and depressed. And that was just like how I coped with my problems, that I didn't really know who Raven was outside of using. And being able to have like a community aspect and living with people that were going through the same thing helps me. But I will say this, like I didn't start working like a 12-step program that I do now. I didn't really do that until my first attempt at it was when I moved out of sober living and realized that not much had changed. And
Okay, that's really important.
Yeah.
Sorry, my line froze up, I think. But that's really important. I want to focus down on that for just a moment, because you had 26 days inpatient. How many months were you in sober living?
3 months. So
Okay.
long enough to do IOP, and it was my choice to leave.
Okay. Your choice to leave sober living, right, after IOP ended. It's kind of like, again, that denial kind of creeps in a little bit, right? I think
Yes.
I didn't think I needed this long, but now that I've done it, I'm good.
Mm-hmm.
I'm ready to go back. So in the transition out of sober living, finished IOP, and now you're quote unquote back into the real world. And as the big book would say, now we got to do life on life's terms, right?
Yes,
Okay.
exactly.
So tell me a little bit about what you experienced from there and what's the next part of your story.
Yeah, so I was constantly restless, irritable, and discontent. I couldn't sit with myself at all. And first I moved back in with my parents, and I was like, okay, if I just get a job and keep myself busy, I'll be okay. And slowly, like, I kind of realized, you know, like alcohol wasn't the problem. Alcohol was my solution. So now that I take away my solution to cope with my problems, I need something else. And for me, that was the 12 steps of recovery. So I started working those, and I moved to Birmingham in a place on my own, got a job, got a dog. You know, life started being good, and I kind of just forgot like what made life good. I stopped being compliant with the 12 steps. And slowly, you know, like I didn't realize it, but people around me realized it, that I was started like having an attitude change back to, you know, me before working a program.
Yeah.
And, you
So
know,
would that be often in recovery, we talk about relapse, but we often talk about pre-relapse, that has to do with the mental, physical, spiritual, emotional state before we ever use again. So
yeah,
it sounds like you were in pre-relapse. So talk a little bit about your emotions or what was going on before you ever, because none of us decide, you know, on a given date, we're going to relapse.
right.
Usually
Yeah.
this pre-relapse, either behavior or thinking, that sneaks up on us. Right?
Yeah. So I became like thinking that life was unfair, wanting external things to change for me to be okay internally. I started being really judgmental, not just of other people, but really judgmental of myself. And I started seeing like all of the things that happened to me in the past as like a negative thing, whereas normally I would see it as like an asset of who I am.
Yeah.
And I was really scared that I was going to drink again or get high. And I talked about it a lot with people, but I didn't really take any action to change it. I wasn't meditating or praying. I wasn't doing inventory, which is something that if you don't know, like if you have like resentments and fear, you inventory and look at it and see why and see the truth of it. So I didn't really do anything different. And I actually went and I tried to get a prescription filled a month before I ever actually relapsed. And I told somebody, and again, like I didn't do much different other than like, okay, I'll just go to a meeting. And eventually I went and picked it up, which started, I was 10 months sober at that time. And I was at like a constant battle. Like, I know what's going to happen if I do this. Well, maybe all that stuff happened in the past was actually dramatic. And, like I'm not actually an alcoholic. I was just having a young phase or whatever. It was just like the most insane battle with myself. Like, I can't explain it, but if you've been through it, you know what I'm talking about. And, like I filled the prescription, I took it, thinking like, like I still have mental health problems. Like this will just help with my anxiety. I won't drink. And,
So slowly but surely, the thing we do where denial starts creeping back in and increasing, but we continue to find ways to rationalize it, push it down, justify, and we find ourselves not telling the full truth again to somebody. Does that make sense?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, too, like I began to think like my problems weren't important enough to talk about with people. And
Yeah.
being honest is like about how I'm feeling. Like,
Yeah.
like I might think that, I shouldn't be feeling this way, but it doesn't change the fact that I am.
Yeah.
But yeah, definitely a lot of denial. And that denial continued for a while too. When I relapsed, I had like a 5-day relapse. And I know it doesn't always get really bad for everyone, but for me, it was like that night after I took those pills, like I started drinking that night, was bar hopping alone. And it was like I was picking up right where I left off 10 months ago. Like I wasn't getting what I wanted out of it. Like no matter how much I drank, I couldn't get enough. I was super emotional, felt guilty, was disappointed in myself. I woke up the next morning, was like, I'm never doing that again. Like today's the day I'm getting sober again, starting out at day one. Truly meant it. If you used a lie detector test on me, like I was so serious. And it was a series of doing that for about 5 days, before my partner actually was like, like you can't do this alone, like no amount of willpower, like you don't want it to get as bad as it did last time, right? And I'm like, but it won't, like it won't. I'm wanting to get sober, so that's enough. And it like I proved to myself 5 days in a row that wasn't enough. So he helped me get into treatment again.
Okay. So back, uh, treatment earlier had been with Bradford?
Right, and Warrior.
Warrior. Okay, great. So were you able to go back?
Yeah, so we went to Warrior. They didn't have a bed for me, so we actually drove to Madison that night. And it was a long process. Intake can take a lot of time, but it was just so urgent, which I'm glad that people like I didn't get too far away from the recovery community, so they knew what was going on, and they were like, yes, get there, do whatever it takes to get in there.
So even if you weren't reaching out like you had been used to doing before, you had established enough community that they were looking and watching and then reached out back to you is what it sounds like. Is that accurate?
Yeah, which is like a beautiful thing that like these people, my friends, and didn't like shun me just because I relapsed. Like, they were very understanding, and like they didn't see me showing up to meetings, or like they saw that I was down and I wasn't talking about it, so they were reaching out to me and just wanted me to be safe and get help.
Yeah.
Which was amazing, because I didn't have that kind of support system the first time I went to treatment, because most people didn't understand. I mean, it's not like I don't expect everybody to understand, but like I had people like me supporting me this time.
Yeah. It's interesting in my own recovery, and many that I've seen, been friends with, been in groups with, worked with, at whatever level, there's this insane thinking that can go on despite all the evidence to the contrary of our need for total honesty and community. We can slip out of it so easily, and to the detriment not only of our sobriety, but sometimes our sanity, our health, our ability to actually function in the world, to bless the world in the way we were created to do. So it sounds like how old are you now?
I'm 24.
Okay, wow. So a lot of living in 24 years in this cycle. So back to Bradford, you're up in Madison. Tell me something. You've told me about this before. There was kind of a surprising finding or discovery when you went back to Bradford. What was it?
Yeah, so I'm telling the people there that it was only like a 5-day relapse. Like, I don't need to be here that long. And they do the assessment and give me my treatment plan. If you've ever been to treatment, the treatment plan is like a big packet of paper, and they have your like diagnosis on there, and it said severe alcoholism. And I looked at it and I was just like, I was only out there drinking for 4 days. Like, how do you know? And then like 10 months of me not drinking, like this hasn't changed. Like, nothing's changed. So this is like a chronic and progressive disease. And, like, I wanted to be better. I had hope at this point. And like, the only way I could make sense of it at the time was just like, okay, well, I'm going to help people, I guess. Like, that's the good thing that comes along with this. And, that's just, at first it started out as like, okay, like, this is happening because I'm going to help people with it. But then like the longer I stay sober and help other women, like I see it and I live it. Like the other night I was working with a girl who just went through a very tough situation that I went through like 2 months ago. And like I was able to help her with it. And, like I feel like my higher power gave me that experience to help other women.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was one of the epiphanies early on too. Even shortly after that diagnosis of severe alcoholism, and then the co-occurring trying to deal with whatever level of anxiety or depression that you had been dealing with. But it sounds like quickly what followed was this epiphany. This is all happening because I'm going to help other people.
Yeah. And it was like, that's one of the aha moments I've had in recovery. I haven't had many, but that happened in treatment, and it kind of just like motivated me, and I got this willingness to like seek recovery and do whatever I had to take. So like when I got out, I didn't go to sober living. I just wasn't able to. So I was really terrified that like I just didn't know if I was going to stay sober or not, but knew I needed to move on and help people. And like fear wasn't enough to keep me sober in the past. So I really I got a sponsor, like I'm going to say like 48 hours after I got out, and was like, can you meet me like tomorrow? Like we need to get on with the step work. So like, I just keep my feet moving. And basically that's what I did. I mean, I was still very discontent at times, and my attitude wasn't the best, but I kept my feet moving, and I worked through the steps in like 90 days. And my sponsor was like, okay, well, now you got to go find sponsees to take through the steps. So, and I remember a girl was like, met me in a meeting. She was like, I'm looking for a sponsor. Can you help me? And I was like, I mean, I'm available to sponsor, but I only have like 3.5, 4 months. Like, are you okay with that? And they were like, yeah, I can relate to that because I'm only have like 10 days sober.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. Do you know of, or if you feel comfortable, was there a genetic component, do you think, in terms of family history? Because there's a difference between some of us that might misuse or even abuse a substance like alcohol, but there is a difference to the level of what we might say is a severe alcohol or an alcoholic, right? There's really different levels. It doesn't mean you can't get hurt very badly from any of those levels. We do, but there is often a different component involved, and sometimes it's a genetic predisposition. Was there a history in the family that you know of?
Yeah, absolutely. So on my dad's side of the family, I actually never got to meet his parents because from what I'm told, they were alcoholics. His mom got diagnosed with a chronic disease and had medication that she wasn't supposed to drink on, and she did, and ended up passing away from alcohol-related complications. And then my dad's dad, very similarly, passed away when my dad was 16. So that was, a very difficult thing. Like, my dad's really resilient for being able to overcome that. And he told my brother and I when we were growing up, like, hey, like this, there's definitely a genetic component. If you ever feel like you're drinking and can't stop, like, you might have this disease. And, and my parents didn't drink in the house when my brother and I were growing up either. I mean, like, definitely like a few times I can count during football season, but it was never like a point in time when I was young where I opened the fridge and there was like alcohol readily available.
Yeah.
Um, so definitely a genetic component.
Okay.
Definitely.
And as you know, I think, and we know that the genetic component doesn't mean that someone will struggle or has to struggle, but it does mean that if they do begin using, it's less likely that they can do it well or manage it, or even probably should even be involved with it. Um, so how do you feel now? There's no one size fits all for anybody's recovery. We know that. There's some common things that are helpful and true, but there's no one size fits all. For instance, some folks that struggle with alcohol or other substances or behaviors actually can come to a place where they can be quite healthy and actually use at a minimal level. Others don't seem to be or want to do that. So for you, what are you thinking about for your recovery here in the near future? What does that look like for you as far as use?
Use, like, for me, I'm going to remain completely abstinent, or at least that's my goal. And like, I have to continue doing what's working for me, and work my program, or else, like, I will find something to make me feel the way that I was trying to feel when I was using substances. Like, kind of going back to what I was saying, like, I have to fill that void. Like, I took away alcohol that was filling this void. Like, I have to put something in its place, or else I'll always go back to it because I'm powerless and I have a spiritual disease or spiritual malady. And I actually, like, saw signs of this void that I'm talking about, like, way before I ever drank.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, tell us about that. This is you hear this a lot, but it's fascinating to me. Describe your experience of that.
yeah. So when I was in middle school, actually, like, I had some traumatic things happen to me, and I had to actually get pulled out of school when I was homeschooled. And I always kind of felt like I never, like, felt like I fit in with other people. And, I tried to like manage the external things going on, to make me feel better internally. And I actually developed an eating disorder. Um, and it was so similar to my, like, obsession with drugs and alcohol. Like, I knew, like, I was losing a lot of weight, I was getting sick, I wasn't able to participate in things that I enjoyed, but I still did it because it, gave me some kind of relief until it didn't. It wasn't sustainable. And I ended up gaining weight back and kind of got better. But even like then, like I was just discontent. I like didn't want to like sit with myself. There was always like I didn't feel well and I didn't know why. I would get headaches all the time, and like I remember going to the doctor like once a year and I'd be like, I have to have like this mono or something, and they would just test me and like they're like, no, you're just like exhausted or something. And like later on I found out like that's a sign of like depression and like having mental illness going on. So does that, I think that answers your question
Yeah,
about. Okay.
absolutely. And this whole thing about some of us realize it before we begin abusing or misusing substances or behavior. Some of us don't, but that connection back, as a big book would say, there really is a spiritual malady here. There's a sickness that's deeper than both physical, mental, or emotional. There's kind of a common spiritual malady for all of us. And before we have enough awareness or maturity or some type of a God moment or whatever, we have no way of coping with that. And before you know it, we have kind of chosen these ways without knowing we've chosen them to protect ourselves or to promote or maneuver through life that just doesn't work well. And the next thing you know, we come out on the other end. And as you said earlier, the solution to our problem has become our problem, right? And we're deeper into it than we could have ever thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you spoke in terms of this go around here where you came back out, couldn't go to sober living, were a little bit afraid how this was going to work, but you made a different type of commitment to telling the truth and to community, and especially to being sponsored this time around. Is that right?
Right. Yes. And like I had faith this time. Like I was kind of skeptical before, but like getting honest with people, like I was terrified of people for a while. So like creating a network in a community, finding a group that I go to regularly, doing H&I, which is hospitals and institutions. So telling my story in treatment centers. If I'm not currently working with my sponsor going through the steps, am I trying to do everything I can to take somebody else through the steps?
Yeah.
And like I was saying, like I wasn't feeling, my attitude wasn't great for a while, but like 6 months in or so, like I was like going on a walk and I was like, like I'm actually present on this walk and I'm actually enjoying it. Whereas before, like I would go see my favorite band at a concert and I would have a terrible time because I was just stuck in self and blocked from enjoying life because I was creating all these problems that they were just of my own making.
Yeah.
So it was a spiritual experience is what we call it. And it was very gradual. Like I used to cry all the time because, I was depressed and didn't think it was going to get better. And now like I cry because I'm like joyous and like feel gratitude and just know that my life wouldn't be like this if I was continuing on the path that I was going down.
That's awesome. When you were describing being I think on the walk, being present, and suddenly realizing I'm actually here and enjoying this, that's the beginnings of gratitude. I know it for me. And then, which is huge in recovery. I always think that there's two things that are so big in recovery and they both belong together. One's humility and one's gratitude, and they both cycle into each other. And
Yeah.
it sounded like your humility was building. I need help. I'll ask these people for help and I'll keep asking them for help. I'll do what they say, right?
Yeah.
And then, as you say, I think you used the word shift. There was this shift. Wasn't all at once, but all at once it was there. And gratitude, I'm present. Oh my gosh. And something begins to change and you can build on that, right?
Yeah. And it's always something that I can go back to because, like I have bad days and my attitude, people will tell me, like I give people consent to tell me when
Yeah.
they see me acting up or, like, and they'll tell me like, hey, when was the last time you meditated? Or, hey, like, how's your sponsees going? Or are you helping anyone? And I love that I have a community that can do that. And when I do take a step back and do those things, like gratitude comes back and humility, like you were saying. And when I humble myself enough to like realize I don't have all the answers and I'm open-minded to what other people suggest, like the results
Yeah.
might not always be instant, but they're always good.
Yeah. Humility seems to open up a much larger way for grace to come into our life in the form of people and anything that can be sent to us. Humility seems to open the door to that. One other thing you said has got me thinking too, was the idea of both being sponsored, but then being moved towards sponsoring, even though you were 3 to 4 months sober this second time, and somebody coming and saying, hey, I need help, could you help me? And you're like, well, yeah, I think I can, I've got this. That's even humility right there. But then, as you said, being willing to help another person, which going back to that second stint at Bradford, that epiphany that came, this is happening so I can help. And by the way, I got to ask you a question again. Tell us what you went to UAB to study again.
Public health and psychology.
Interesting.
Yeah, I had
I guess my guess is that when you went there and listed those as what you wanted to study, I'm pretty sure you weren't thinking it was going to happen this way.
absolutely not. And I think maybe like I was really curious about it, not because I knew that I was going to struggle with substance use disorder, but just like there was some sense of familiarity and like psychology and learning about all this mental illness and public health and like how can we prevent it or how can we make community level change. Like I always wanted to help people, but I had no idea it was going to be like this. And like that's just another way of like once I get out of the universe's way and become unblocked, like there will be a life created for me that maybe not what I dreamed of, but it's for me it's been better. Like
Yeah,
so.
yeah, that's a beautiful story. Um, so I want to ask you a question that's kind of practical for this season that we're in with COVID and the pandemic and the restrictions of community, right? At the very time that many of us who struggle with substance use disorder or in recovery, doing well, or wanting to get in recovery, or whatever the status is, at that very time we need this more than ever, we are restricted in many ways about groups meeting face to face. We don't hug like we used to, handshakes and all, and hugs are free in recovery and they're really important, right?
Yeah.
So what have you found for you that has been helpful during this time, or that you could suggest for others to think about if they're looking for community?
Yeah, this is so important because, they say addiction is like a disease of isolation. And for me, there's Zoom meetings. It took me a while to get used to 12-step meetings on Zoom, but taking the opportunity to really get, your network of people that you reach out to. So like I started reaching out to people daily again. Sometimes, it would be weeks before I would talk to people, but I started checking in on people to see how they're doing, no matter if I felt good or not. Like that helped me get me out of myself. Um, I also started meditating again, like longer. Like I was slacking because life was just, like I felt like life was more important, and I try to look for the opportunities for me to grow regardless of whether I could see people physically or not. A lot of meetings are slowly starting to go back to in person, and I've been going to a few, and making sure that like those, like I took a girl to her first in person meeting ever. Like that was
Wow.
awesome. She had been sober for like 2 months, and never been to an in-person meeting. So like when I do go to these meetings, I try to make the newcomers feel welcome and, try to meet them where they're at. If they don't want to hang out in person, like I'll Zoom with them or call them, like whatever.
Yeah.
Um,
So we know that in the Birmingham and Central Alabama, and even now with Zoom, a meeting can be anywhere. So you got call-in meetings, we've got Zoom meetings. Some of them are starting back, and sponsoring can take place over the phone, FaceTime, and Zoom as well. It's not like you say, it's not like we really want it ideally, but I think I'm hearing from some folks that Zoom sometimes actually makes them concentrate better. They're not as distracted by other things as well, even though we're losing some of those other touches that we would like to have. Are there anything else going on for you right now in terms of pandemic and COVID, or anything that you're seeing can help other people? Or
I mean, there's like literally a meeting like anytime that you can join. I met some lovely ladies from Canada. And like no matter where you go, as far as 12 steps go, like the solution is going to be the same. So like these people are, I can relate to them so well, even though they're in another country. I can't really think of anything else off the top of my head. But
yeah,
it seems like we've been very resilient and bounced back and found a solution to stay sober and continue with recovery.
yeah. All right. So one last question. It seems to me I remember that you celebrated a pretty big milestone within the last month. Can you tell folks about that? Would you like to share it with them?
Yeah. So I celebrated a year on August 4th. So I am like coming up on 14 months now. This time being sober has been a lot different because at first I felt like I lost those 10 months. And I've really been trying not to get like wrapped up in time and have been like more focused on the present moment. And, it seems like it's flown by this time.
Yeah.
And it may have been partly because of the pandemic or just because this program is really working and I'm not, just if I can get to 6 months or if I can just get to 9 months, like it's like I'm right here, right now, no matter what.
Yeah. Right. And sounds like your work with the Addiction Prevention Coalition is going well. I know y'all are having to adjust because so much of you do is with students in the schools or in groups, and y'all have had to get kind of really clever about how you're doing some of those things. So going forward, what are some of the one or two things you guys are going to be doing with students in the coming year?
Yeah, so even though we've been meeting with students on Zoom, it's actually given access for us to meet with students that we normally wouldn't. We just got a new grant too, and it's going to help allow us to expand a lot of the programs that we're already doing. I just got trained to be a teen mental health first aid instructor. So we're working on finding a way to implement that virtually, which is huge. I mean, I'm still like trying to comprehend that we're going to be able to do that. And my position as AmeriCorps Vista is a year long, which is how I started here as a student specialist. It ends in the end of October. So once that's over with, I will be a project or program coordinator on the new grant. So I'll have a bigger role and get to help with a lot of new strategies that's written into that grant that I'm just so excited about. I can do a talk just on that.
Well, I'm sure we're going to get to talk about that again because I can tell that's a big thing in your heart.
Yeah.
And the fact that you, teen mental health was so close to you because of your story and the ins and outs of all those different things that you were facing back then that you've seen in other people. And what you've come through, there's no doubt that it's going to be used to help other people, just like that epiphany you had a year or so ago. So first, I want to just thank you for sharing your story. I've shared with you before. I've got a good friend whose therapist has been a big person in my recovery and then helping me help others. And he always said, you got to tell your story 5,874 times before you get healed. And I don't know how many you've told, but I could see more healing for you today. And I think there's people out there that are going to hear this or hearing it, that it's going to either start or continue their healing too. So thank you for being so brave to come and share. And before we go, September's Recovery Month. Okay.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of what APC does with prevention, but I'm convinced prevention is recovery and recovery is prevention. So tell us just a little bit about what you know that's still upcoming in Recovery Month, and maybe give us a link to some of that.
Yeah, so September is Recovery Month, and a lot of organizations and agencies in Birmingham have come together to create this calendar of events that are going on like almost every day. So this is an event that's on the calendar. I'll post the link in there, but you can also go like the page BHAM Loves Recovery Month on Facebook, and we'll be posting updates on events that are going on all month. Normally we have the recovery rally, but we've come together to find something to do virtually, and I think this is really awesome. Tomorrow there is recovery ally training that the UAB Collegiate Recovery Community will be hosting. But let me post the link in the chat for the Facebook page, and then I will see if I can post a picture of the calendar.
Okay. All right. So Raymond's putting in our chat for you guys that link that'll get you into the Recovery Month, all the different things that are being done. As she said, some adjustments based on COVID, not doing as many things personally or together, but they're there. Along those lines, remember that the journey, what used to be the journey day of recovery, is now like a journey month of recovery, and it's ongoing online. If you go to apcbham.org, you can link into those days that are still left. They're free. There's a lot of different components you can go to. Speaking of adjustments to COVID, the Parents of Addicted Loved One group, one of them we had to close for a while. It's opening back up on October the 1st to meet in person at the Moore Center. Some of you heard Steve Moore speak a couple of weeks ago. That one will start back Thursday, October the 1st in person. We have one that's been back going at Double Oak Community Church in Shelby County on Monday nights. We have one in Springville that is doing Zoom on Thursdays. And then next week, Carrie Wimberly, who's my wife, who's also with APC, and I will be doing a Zoom module about PAL groups. So if you're interested in ally helping family recovery, that type of thing, that's a resource for you guys to tap into, either to help find a group, or we would love to train anybody out there that's willing to start their own Parents of Addicted Loved One resource in any community. We'll do that for free, give you all the resources. Would love to help you with that. Next APC webinar will be in a couple of weeks, and it's going to actually focus on grief in terms of recovery. And with that, it'll also get us into October 10th. There will be a grief retreat. So for any of you that are out there that are struggling with grief due to recovery, due to someone's addiction, whether you've lost them to that addiction or not, there's a lot of grief surrounding families in recovery, even if the loved one is still alive. The grief that comes with loss of dreams, loss of community, loss of family connections, that type of thing. And so if you're interested in that, 2 weeks we'll do the webinar, but it also points us to the October 10th grief retreat for the state of Alabama. So Raven, anything you want to add before we go?
No, I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you everyone for joining. I hope my story helps someone today.
Thanks again for being brave with us and sharing, and I'm sure we'll talk again soon. Guys, thanks for joining us today. And if you're looking for recovery resources, remember apcbham.org, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Thanks, guys. Bye, Raven.